Okay, so hello everyone. We'll go ahead and get started. For those of you who are just joining now, my name is Jazz Keeler and I am the Contract Virtual Programs Coordinator with Griffin Art Projects, and we're so delighted that you are able to join us for this virtual artist talk. So I'd like to begin by acknowledging that Griffin Art Projects is situated on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the Tsleil-Waututh, Squamish, and Stolo nations, and we are honored and grateful to undertake our work here. Now, before we jump in, I just have a few quick housekeeping notes. If you were with us for our last session, I do apologize, but bear with me as I just quickly go through a few introductory notes. So first, I'd just like to mention that if you would like to see live captions displayed for this presentation, you can enable this by selecting the CC live transcription button at the bottom of your screen. And I'd just like to mention that it's not perfectly accurate, and in particular, place names tend to be trickier. So bear with us, but we do hope that it will be helpful in capturing most of what we are saying today. And then secondly, I just wanted to mention that if you are having any technical issues with your audio or with the Zoom interface, we are live streaming all of these events from Griffin's Facebook page, and I will go ahead and drop a link in the chat after my introductory notes. So be sure to check that link if you are experiencing any issues on Zoom. So I'll just go ahead and stop sharing my screen. The last thing I want to mention before we jump in is that we are in webinar format today, which just means that we can't see or hear audience members, but there will be a chance at the end of today's presentation to ask questions to Wil. So you'll notice at the bottom of your screen that there's both a chat and a Q&A dialog box. And for the audience questions, we do ask that you type them into the Q&A dialog box, and we'll be checking back there at the end of the presentation. There's also the opportunity to ask your questions out loud, and we always love to hear from audience members. So if that is your preference, definitely just indicate that in the Q&A dialog box, and I'll go ahead and unmute you when the time comes. So that's the end of my housekeeping notes. And it's an honor once again to introduce Henry Hung Liu. So for those of you who were not present for the last session, I will go ahead and introduce Henry. So Henry Liu is a curator, writer, and artist based in Vancouver and Toronto, Canada. And presently, Henry is the curator and interim executive director at Centre A, Vancouver International Centre for Contemporary Asian Art. And he is a co-founder of Call Again, a mobile initiative and collective committed to creating space for contemporary diasporic artistic practices within Canada and beyond. And Henry has presented independent projects through numerous channels, such as Creative Time Summit. Oh, my notes got cut up here. I'm so sorry, but Henry, I will, without further ado, go ahead and hand the spotlight over to you.
Thank you so much, Jess. I think that was a very great introduction already. Thank you so much. So hi, everyone. So like Jess said, I'm Henry Hung Liu. I'm the curator and interim ED of Centre A, Vancouver International Centre for Contemporary Asian Art. Before I begin, I would like to acknowledge that Centre A is situated on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and Squamish peoples, on which we have the honor to create, learn, and live. Located in Vancouver's Chinatown, Centre A also acknowledges and recognizes the complex and multi-layered experiences of the individuals who have lived, built, and contributed to the vibrancy of this historic neighborhood, and those who continue to do so today. I do want to apologize in advance for all the noise. It's so ironic that in a pandemic, the construction projects never stop. So it's actually kind of, in a way that will show there is like a nice intersection with that as well, this idea of business as usual. And I want to introduce Centre A to everybody, just in case you're not familiar with who we are. Centre A is the only public art gallery in Canada dedicated to contemporary Asian and Asian diasporic perspectives since 1999. We are committed to providing a platform for engaging diverse communities through public access to the arts, creating mentorship opportunities for emerging artists and arts professionals and stimulating critical dialogue through exhibitions and public programs that complicate understandings of migrant experiences and diasporic communities. And our programming has been rooted in a curiosity about and an ongoing exploration of what a contemporary Asian art center can do in the current times. And we gratefully acknowledge the generous support of Canada Council for the Arts, the BC Arts Council, the Government of British Columbia, the City of Vancouver, and all of our funders, donors, and programming partners and Century members. Today it's such an honor to collaborate with Griffin Arts Projects, Asian Canadian Writers Workshop, and the new gallery on this visual conference, Who's Chinatown. And we are really delighted to present an artist talk by our current exhibiting artist, Wil Quan. Hi, Wil. So I will quickly introduce Wil as well. Wil Quan is a Hong Kong-born Canadian artist whose work examines the diverse ways that hegemony is produced through economic systems and cultural narratives. His work is held in the permanent collections of M+, Forkstone Artworks, and Hart House at the University of Toronto. Quan has been artist in residence at the Center for Chinese Contemporary Art in Manchester, the Headland Center for the Arts, the Irish Museum of Modern Art, the Art Gallery of Ontario. He has participated in numerous exhibitions at MoMA PS1, ZKM Center for Art and Media, and the MACVAL, Art Museum at the University of Toronto, the Art Gallery of Ontario, Western Front, and in biennials and triennials in Liverpool, Folkestone, Montreal, and Venice. And Quan is associate professor in studio art in the Department of Arts, Culture, and Media, University of Toronto, Scarborough, and the Masters of Visual Studies program at the John H. Daniels Faculty of Architecture, Landscape, and Design, University of Toronto, St. George campus. And without further ado, I would like to give the spotlight to Wil. So today's talk, I think how it's structured is that we will, because Wil's current exhibition at Center A, Exclusion Acts, opened on the 10th of March. Well, because of, just where we are in the world, we didn't have an opening. So today is actually, I'm gonna just take this opportunity to celebrate the opening of the exhibition. And the show will be on at Center A until the end of May. And we're open from Thursday to Saturdays, 12 to 6 p.m. So today's talk, we will be we're having the opportunity to revisit some of Wil's previous work, and then his current practice and some of the ongoing but newer explorations of out of the economic conditions and social beliefs that we are entangled in the current times. So yeah, hi Wil.
Hi Henry. Thank you for that introduction, Henry. First, my deepest thanks to you, Henry, for inviting me to do this show at Center A. I want to thank actually all the staff and the installers at Center A who did a really terrific job installing the show, bringing it together, especially because I was working remotely from Toronto. And thank you to the conference organizers, Karen Tam and Griffin Art Projects. I'm really pleased to be included in this week's events, or this weekend's events, sorry. So as Henry was saying, we thought a little bit about how to structure the talk. So for the first part of the talk, Henry has asked me to share some previous work to provide some context for the conference attendees. especially since the show at Center A does not deal with the subject of Chinatowns per se. So in preparing for the talk, I thought, geez, how am I gonna shoehorn my practice into the conference theme? But then I looked at previous work, going through that work, unsurprisingly, Chinatown themes are there, in implicit or indirect ways, in different interests that I have, particularly the experiences of the Chinese diaspora, maybe the complicated idea of home and belonging, and especially the economic forces that cause things like upheaval and displacement. And then in the second part of the talk, Henry and I are gonna do a tour through the works in the Center A exhibition. And then hopefully if I make good use of my time, I can play some excerpts from the videos that are in this show. Sound good, Henry? Anything to add?
I think that's good. Let's delve into it. I'm excited. I want to say how it was such a pleasure and honor to bring Wil's work to the West Coast, because I think that your perhaps last involvement with the West Coast was at Western Front. And I think that it's such a timely, and what we have done at Center A with your current exhibition, I think it's a timely examination of a lot of the subjects that are really embedded in our everyday. Wonderful. So I will just open up the slides and I will share my screen. Wonderful. So I will enter full screen. Can everybody see?
Yes.
Great. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, let's start with the first picture. So I decided to start here with a work from 2002 that uses Chinatown as a backdrop that I think is encoded with important significations. I've never lived in the Toronto Chinatown along Spadina Avenue that you see here in the image. My family settled in North Scarborough on the border with Markham. I have a feeling that Vancouver'S have heard of Scarborough and Markham, but just in case, those are suburban municipalities in the Greater Toronto area known for their large immigrant populations. So growing up in the suburbs, this older Chinatown on Spadina Avenue was, for me, really just a kind of interface, albeit one with elements that were both familiar, but also hinted at a world that was much larger than Canada, hinting at other places that were full of potential for new experiences. And let's go to the next slide. This is a work from 2006, and it is about Chinatowns. I made this while I was living in Europe, in the Netherlands and in Italy between 2004 and 2006. This piece is made up of two self-advancing slide projectors and 168 35mm slides that contain only these little fragments of text. Henry, there are a couple more images, so maybe if you go to the next one, you can see some of the changes in the text. The text in the slides map out a conceptual driving tour through all of the Chinatowns and Chinese enclaves both past and present, at least present in 2006 on the European continent that I could find through research. I think the viewer will probably recognize the short phrases as directions that you would get in a Google Maps route search. Back then, actually, I didn't use Google Maps. The popular software back then was Via Michelin. So the work is this conceptual mapping. Oh, that's too far. And for me, the research was really interesting. You know, there are some Chinese enclaves that were conventional high street areas that you would recognize if you saw the name of the street, like Spadina Avenue, if you lived in a particular European city. But others were more obscure industrial zones in the peripheries of cities where migrant labor networks operated. So the viewer kind of fluctuates between recognition and non-recognition as they navigate through, along with the route instructions. I think this work is kind of representative of my engagement with Chinatowns. I'm not necessarily interested in their architectonics or their visual motifs, or even their transmission of cultural heritage. I think I'm more interested in them as part of larger systems involving the movement of people, the movement of their labor, and the movement of their capital. Henry, you should feel free to jump in if you have any questions or comments as we go along.
Yeah, for sure. Yes.
Okay.
Sounds good.
So
And
that's
always come back a little bit, and then as we go, because
Sure.
we can do like a more general.
So that's a work from 2006. Let's go to the next work. This is a work from 2009. It's a grid of 80 photographs of red envelopes that are used in Chinese custom to give gifts of money during Lunar New Year or other important celebrations as a symbolic gesture of sharing prosperity and fortune, good fortune. Henry, can you go to the detail? The envelopes in the work that I included were all printed by banks in Europe, North America, and Asia. So on one level, the viewer sees this kind of corporate cultural appropriation, playing fast and loose with cultural traditions, cultural imagery. On another, I kind of think of this as a sort of map of the global Chinese diaspora, a large portion of which participates fully in the transnational financial system.
I like how in this work there is, well, this work was made in 2009, and then I think that this is like an ongoing kind of acts of all the corporations and banks that really kind of like tap into the Chinese market, and then how sort of align themselves with a certain celebratory kind of occasions, and really to in a way, ironically, it's like, I mean, accumulation of fortune. So maybe I will ask that, how would you see this kind of ongoing practice of, you know, in a way, I think it's consuming the consumerization of, is that even a word? Sorry, of cultures. And in this case, Chinese culture specifically.
I don't really understand your question.
Oh, what I'm talking about is that how all of these banks and corporations, they are on, for example, on the Chinese New Year, and then they have all of these red envelopes that kind of celebrate the occasion. And then also, I think that there's this drive to tap into the Chinese market, and then to be more involved with a certain group of people. And I think that, so what do you think of that? Because the work was made in 2009, and then is this like an ongoing phenomenon and practice that you might have observed?
Yeah. Well, some of these envelopes are very old. I just collected them from family members, and when I was making the piece, I called around, and they're stored in people's drawers. So it's been, I think corporations or companies have been doing this for a long time. What I think of it, I think I'm agnostic. I mean, it's something that companies do. They appropriate things, they commodify things. So I think I'm really just using using that appropriation as a way to talk about how culture and all these other forces in society interact. Yeah. Is that?
Yes. Good? Yeah. Okay. So shall we move to the next?
Yeah. There's another work that's dealing with finance industry or banks. So this goes back a little bit back to 2006. I made this when China was going through its accession to the World Trade Organization. I was in Shanghai then for residency. And part of that accession to the WTO involved, amongst other things, opening up the Chinese banking system to the global economy. This piece is an earthwork. So if you look at the image carefully there, it's in that construction site there. That's the earthwork. It's about 45 feet long. And it's made with building rubble collected from that demolition site. Oh, too quick. The geometric shape of the earthwork is the logo of the Bank of China. It's a shape that I suspect likely was derived from old coinage, or inspired by it at least. We're looking at this work because I think in my work I'm interested in these vast structural and historical forces that cause displacement, cause kind of major changes to the places where we live.
How did you identify this site to do this work?
I think I saw it from the subway station. On that's a subway line there, an elevated subway line. But the apartment that the residency put me up in was nearby.
And did you ever try to find out what happened after the work? So
I was back in Shanghai maybe 5 years later. It's now new development, much newer than the type of structures you see in that photograph there. They had just poured a foundation and they were starting to build it up. So it was slated for development. Exactly the kinds of flows of money that was moving through the Chinese economy to stimulate or finance these kinds of developments. I think in this work for me really is about the scale. I was just shocked by the scale of what was happening there, and trying to understand the underlying structural things that were happening.
Shall we go to next?
Yeah, let's move on. It's a research image from another work I made in Shanghai during that residency. This is a street scene from the Shanghai French Concession, which is a section of the city that was annexed by the French in, I think it was 1849, maybe, after China's defeat in the First Opium War. Concessions in China were these extraterritorial enclaves, often in coastal cities that were used by foreign governments as a foothold for political and economic activity. The French concession, I think the Chinese government considered them colonial occupations that were accepted under unequal treaties. Yeah, so there's more images there of the location. The French concession in Shanghai is actually quite a large parcel of land. And it grew, it kind of doubled in size in the end of the 1800s, continued to expand up till the Second World War, when I think control of it was turned over to the Japanese by the Vichy French government. The turn of the century, 1900s, there were these trees that were planted throughout the concessions, and that's really what we're looking at in these photographs. During the French rule, the district was kind of built up as a consular and commercial and residential area. And these trees, which are very hardy urban trees, are there to kind of make the neighborhood more pleasant to live in. So they're planted systematically throughout the concession. Henry, you've probably been to Shanghai. You can kind of understand where you are in the French concession based on how leafy it is, right? So the sun and the shade, I should say, and the sun-dappled streets make this area, at least when I was there, a very popular neighborhood for expats and for affluent Chinese. And I suspect it was perhaps one reason why the neighborhood survived quite intact, despite these really massive redevelopment, demolition and redevelopment projects throughout Shanghai. Let's go to the next slide, Henry. So the work itself consists of these 4 animations that I made using morphing software. The images are photographs of the very distinct bark of the plane trees that I've cropped very tightly. And then the patterns, the shapes morph very slowly, like incredibly slowly, almost imperceptibly. So in the you're walking through the installation, there's movement, but almost imperceptible. I think is there another slide? Maybe a detail?
Yes.
Yeah.
How was this work perceived?
How was it received?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Sorry.
Received?
Yeah.
It's a tough question to answer. I think here is an installation shot from, it was shown in Poland. I think on the surface, it's opaque. You really have to kind of understand the imagery and what it is. I think it showed, I can't remember, it showed again somewhere else, but yeah, I don't know how to answer that question.
Was it shown in Shanghai? because this came out of that residency you did.
No, it was never shown in Shanghai, although this show was organized by a Shanghai curator.
And I wonder, I'm curious because, we're talking about all these trees, they were planted very specific era. And almost I feel like these patterns, they're really considered as, just the trees is kind of these residues of colonization. So I wonder if this kind of looking at how colonization sort of shaped where we are, the cityscape, and then the type of perhaps cultural practices in certain sites. I wonder if that's something you were interested in developing this project.
Yeah, I think there was a little bit of all of that. I don't know, when you were talking, I'm seeing this question from Yvonne in the chat about the slowness. I think the slowness is important. The slowness and the subtlety of it, I think, was attempt to mirror my kind of noticing of the trees and understanding why suddenly in this part of the city was the landscape so uniform. There was something that was very systematic that was done there, and then slowly kind of unearthing it. It's their trees, they kind of evolve slowly, so I can imagine their presence there over time, changing the character of the neighborhood from a period of occupation, military occupation, evolving slowly into a neighborhood that segregated based on more subtle things like class and access. So I think it's all of those subtle things in there, not only one thing, many kind of inclinations in there.
Great. So I will.
How are we doing for time? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Then I'll talk about this work. This is a work more recent. Well, not that recent actually. 2014. It's a 3-channel video installation. It's a remake of a very well-known work by a Toronto artist named John Massey from the 1980s. John's three screen film, he made it using film installation, involved this central shot of him and a hitchhiker driving around in a van, making small talk. And on the screens that flank the central shot, there are these images that flash that depict the diverging mental impressions that each of them have of the topics in their conversation. John's piece is, I think, an exploration of post-structuralist ideas about how elusive language and meaning is. I've always been a fan of that work. My remake, however, is much less theoretical. It's much less neutral, let's say. So I made a couple of key alterations. The 2 white men are replaced in my version with a white real estate agent and an Asian home buyer. And instead of driving along on a nondescript road, rural road somewhere in Ontario, I think that's where he shot it, the agent and our client are driving from Markham And that's the kind of opening shots that you see there. Suburban street to Forest Hill, which is an affluent neighborhood in central Toronto. Maybe if you go to a next slide, kind of see the images flashing that are the mental impressions of these two characters. My images are images called from the internet, and they are much more, they play with stereotypes and misinterpretations around their conversation, which is about things like home, about property, about heritage and authenticity, ethnicity, and class. And the images in their conversation are kind of written and pushed to a point of caricature. So this shift, this idea of language and meaning is now I've appropriated to talk about other kinds of slippages and elusiveness.
I remember there was a point in the video talking about, for example, Hong Kong and India. I think that there is, and basically, so the channel in the middle is really like kind of in a way documenting from different angles. I think I remember of the two people in the car, and then talking about Hong Kong, and then there's like this very stereotypical kind of like high rise, like those like really dense and then tall apartment buildings in Hong Kong, and then there's all those the imagery that are really stereotypically kind of embedded when certain objects are discussed. It's not really a question. I was just thinking about how the flashing those images that create this like sequence of really this like flashes and then really hyper, almost really surreal in that way.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure what sequence you're referring to, but the piece kind of plays with that. Like just that, for example, take the idea of density, right? So depending on where you come from, your perspective, density can be depicted in one way as a positive thing, or for someone else, density is perceived as something else. Crowds and teeming masses, let's say.
Is there one more image of the work? Yes.
Yeah, so it's 2014. I mean, we're well into YouTube and all the massive archive of cultural content, cultural stereotypes circulating on the internet, both authentic stuff and stuff that is misinterpreted.
There's a question I want to ask, but I would just leave it to after, because that would be a more productive question.
Yeah, let's move on so we can get to the Center A stuff. Actually, this is the final work I'll talk about before we jump into the stuff that's at Center A. This is more recent work. It's an installation that consists of these household containers that I've collected over a number of years. They're objects that you probably find in any domestic environment. But for me, particularly things that you would find in a Chinese household, at least from my experience. Floating in each of the containers is a plastic flower, actually a plastic flower petal. And in each petal is cradling a magnetized needle. I think there's a detail. If we go to the next one. Yeah. So this method of making a compass is pretty ancient. Likely comes from China. I think most viewers, though, will recognize it as something from childhood, teaching children how to make a homemade compass and how compasses work. In the installation, the compasses are magnetized so that they point or they orient themselves naturally to face south as opposed to north, which is would be the conventional way of doing it. The title, Load, refers for me to two things, both a lodestone and a lodestar. Lodestone is a naturally magnetized piece of stone, and a lodestar is a star that's a guiding light for navigation. Load is also, of course, a play on the word load, L-O-A-D, for baggage or weight. I think of this as a kind of portrait of first-generation immigrants. And for me, immigrants of the Chinese diaspora. In that generation, that first generation, I always see this enduring tension between home in the adopted country, in the country where they migrated, and the ancestral home that one is left behind. I think probably true of all diasporas. With the latter really maintaining this profound hold and attraction. So the work tries to capture that in a metaphorical way, right? This very vast, invisible magnetism of home that is always drawing you as an immigrant in a slightly different direction. So just load from 2020.
Okay. Well,
okay, that takes us to
arrived at the exhibition at Center A. I guess, first of all, I have a question about the title because Exclusion Acts, I wonder, because the exhibition really talks about the inequalities and then these imbalances and then within economic conditions. I wonder, maybe just thinking about the title of the show, what are some of the key points that you had when you came up with this title?
The title was a play on Exclusion Act, of course, but I wanted it to expand a little bit beyond that. So it's actually, the word exclusion here is referring to exclusion, like processes that create inequality or imbalances that segregate or that exclude. So I think I was trying to activate that a little bit to take that historical reference, and then as you go into the show, it's about contemporary matters. I can say that in the show there's 4 new works, and really they look at a number of things that kind of hang together thematically, but are different ways of approaching the subject of, very broadly speaking, let's say, inequality. So there's work in there that's about race and labor. There's a work in the show about very fanatical approaches to the economy. There's a work that's about financialization, specifically in the rental housing sector. I'll talk a little bit about what I mean there. Yeah, so first bunch of images show various galleries, spaces at Center A, and as the viewer moves through them, are confronted with these almost billboard-sized prints from a series called Endemic. If you move to the next slide, then we can see a couple more maybe. And there's another one on the left. And then the fourth one. So there's 4 of these images. It's a larger series, but those are the 4 that we decided to show. I think what I'll say about this work is that the images are meant to communicate in a very direct way. But the text, the idiomatic nature of the text is trying to introduce a slightly more ambiguous voice, right? A voice that maybe on the surface sounds like a slogan, but maybe to read it a bit more, starts to, I don't know how to describe it. Maybe it starts to hint at a sense of knowingness, maybe a bit of weariness, a bit of exasperation. So it's supposed to be a slightly different voice, whereas the image is clearly what it is. It represents labor and the kind of racialization of low-wage labor.
And this is like a more recent work. I wonder, well, to me, I think that there's a specific angle from which the work was created. It's we're talking about how things were, a lot of things were just going on as usual, and then also all of these already low-wage labor is like overworked, and then there is the factory, and then also. So I wonder, all of these elements, are they sort of more responding to where we are right now? And in terms of the process, like, did you identify certain like scenes, may I say, in this all of these photographs, and then you come up with a sort of like slogans? Or so I kind of wonder, like, the process of making this work a little bit more.
I think the images and the context, like Tyson Foods and slaughterhouses and the kind of labor issues, environmental issues, right, associated with that corporation. Like, those are the things that I follow and have always been interested in. I think a lot of these, the images, the use of language, are just kind of things that float around in my studio, in my, thinking. And I think, if anything, this was just a moment to bring them together as this set of images and this play with language. So yeah, on some level, it is kind of responding to pandemic, although it's not, I'm not trying to make pandemic art. It's just part of this kind of practice, like just my interest in these kinds of social relations. If you keep going, then we can see the actual images. I put the actual images so that people can see the details there. Yeah. Also, they're not photographs that I make. So I'm collecting and reconfiguring. So these are things that are part of the stuff that just kind of floats through my practice.
So the question I wanted to ask earlier was that, there's a lot of found imagery and then a lot of found footage that can be seen in a lot of your work. I wonder what's your relationship with these material, and then how you have incorporated these material into your practice. Kind of want to ask that and to look into these, like the use of found footage.
Well, some found footage or found material I use because it's because of its material quality, its signification, because it's an image that maybe is iconic, or that it belongs to a certain vernacular, right? Maybe it's photojournalism, or stock photography has a look. It's very kind of cold. So I think part of it is about playing with that vernacular. Part of it can be practical. Some of these images I would not be able to make, both in terms of access, but also in terms of the staging of them, let's say. So I think there's many reasons why I work with the material, found material. It really depends on the context of the work. Here, what I was trying to make were these assemblages of text and image that spoke about relationships between people. And some of them existed, right? And others were constructed. In this case, it wasn't necessary that I went about constructing the image on my own.
Is now a good time to go into the racket piece?
Well, let's see. I think I had another. How much time do we have?
We have quite some time.
Okay. If you go to the next deadpan. Yeah, deadpan. I love that.
So the death cult.
Yeah. So the work is the image on the right there. The image on the left just shows its scale and where it is in the show. So this piece is a granite sculpture. It's actually the first one I was able to make, but it's part of a series. I have a bunch of these quotes, statements made by politicians and public figures that are really outrageous statements. In this case, prioritizing, well, actually in all cases, prioritizing like an ideological dogma over everything else. In this quote, "There are more important things than living," is a quote from the Texas Lieutenant Governor. I'm sure many people came across this in the news. His name is Dan Patrick, and he's made this statement advocating for sacrificing lives to ensure profit making goes uninterrupted in his state. So, the fanaticism here is so absurd, or the performance of it, at least, that it borders, I don't know what the word is, borders on the philosophical, maybe. So I knew I had to make a work about it. So it's etched onto black granite. This is a kind of conventional grave marker that you'd find in any, you can get it fabricated by any like a memorial manufacturer. For me, the sculpture is, I kind of think of it as serving as a kind of inverted memorial. It's meant to be this lasting marker of human senselessness, callousness. So it's this indelible mark. And so it's important to put his face on there as well. It becomes inseparable. Yeah, so this is in the show. It sits in relation to these other images of folks, working in these dire conditions, dangerous conditions.
What are some of the quotes? I remember there was a quote from Margaret Thatcher.
There's no alternative. Yeah, I thought that was also appropriate for a gravestone. She was talking about the economy. There's one from Lawrence Summers about how it makes economic sense to export toxic waste to African countries. Charlton Heston, NRA quote about his gun, stuff like that. We had talked about trying to make more of these and having a whole kind of gallery of them. Yeah, kind of neoliberal ideologies. Oh.
Is there another image of it? No.
No.
The one.
The racket. So you want to get to this work. I think we have time to show a bit of the clips. You think?
Yep.
I just thought maybe I'll just say first, I'll just set it up a little bit. This work is one of 2 video installations in the show. This piece is comprised of found footage, all appropriated. It's like public relations B-roll of the daily bell ringing that happens on the balcony of the New York Stock Exchange. I've been collecting these clips for a very long time. I have actually close to 1,000 of them. For me, there's something, it's the mechanical quality of it, the ceaseless production of the spectacle, the harsh clanging of the bell, the really surreal tableau of exuberant executives, corporate mascots, the kind of garish, intensely colored staging on the balcony, emblazoned with logos. All of this, like after you watch a couple of the clips, starts to become, for me at least, menacing, kind of pathological. A lot of it seems incredibly indulgent. I think the piece, for me, it's important to kind of see it, this kind of carnival, as kind of obscuring, belying how increasingly the flow of money, trading, infrastructure is actually very secretive. That's really what characterizes the financial economy today. It's secrecy, not so much spectacle, but you have this thing that is kind of still put in front of us as a representation of confidence and progress. Anyways, let's Jazz, I think you're doing the video. I hope this works.
Thank you, Jess. I'm gonna reshare my
Thank you,
screen.
Jess.
1 second. Just had to exit and then. So I like how you know the bell ringing at the New York Stock Exchange, and how I've been reading about it, how they on different days they have like some kind of, sometimes it has celebrities to be there and to kind of celebrate. Okay, it's like, okay, good luck for the whole trading day. And then to wrap it up also in like a very celebratory kind of way. It's really bizarre and surreal to see, like it's like everything is going as usual, and then you have all these people, they are basically repeating the same kind of actions at these bell ringing. It's like very robotic kind of gestures, like clapping, and then there's some like with the masks on. Yeah, it's quite a sight, I would say. And especially the pieces now in the gallery, and then we can constantly hear this bell ringing, and there's a constant reminder of, you know, how perhaps more metaphorically, like how money flows, and then this kind of and all of these flow of I guess economic supremacy. Great, and I would encourage, if anybody's in Vancouver, I would encourage to experience this piece in person, because it's quite, you have to be in the room to really hear the bells, and then and stand there and slightly tilt your head up a little bit, and then see how all of this footage are playing in a role. Next slide.
Yeah, let's go to. So this is the last. This is the last work.
Can anyone hear me? Because I feel like my video has been frozen. 1 second.
There's a bit of lag.
Okay. Sorry, just give me 1 second. Okay. Is it now better, or is still there is a?
It's not good.
Okay, well, I blame it on the construction outside. But can everybody see my slides?
Yeah, the image is there now.
Okay. Oh, thank you so much, Jess. This is great. That's always good to have. That's why it's always good to have backups.
Okay, I'm going to talk about this work, and then we can watch the video and move on to the Q&A, because I want to make time for that. So this is the final work in the exhibition. It's also a video work comprised of found footage. It's footage that was produced or pertains to 3 large Canadian, what are called real estate investment trusts, or Reits. So there's 3 of them that are addressed in this work. One called Canadian Apartment Reits, or CAP REIT, On one channel, there's footage pertaining to a company called Boardwalk Reit, which actually I think is based out in Calgary, and Main Street Equity Corp. So these three companies. Also, I think that's also in Calgary. These three companies cumulatively own close to 100,000 residential rental units across Canada, mostly in Ontario, BC, and Alberta, and probably more than that at this point because they are constantly buying up buildings, apartment buildings. A REIT is essentially a corporate landlord that has converted its real estate assets, its holdings, into stocks that can then be purchased and traded by investors, making these firms what are into so-called financialized landlords. And the rental units that they own become these liquid financial vehicles whose sole function is to be traded to generate a profit. And so these units become subject to a financial logic rather than use value, essentially as someone's home. The videos in the installation through montage, through careful editing, attempt, among other things, to try to reveal how the kind of rhetorical misdirection that these financialized landlords use to justify their kind of unrelenting extraction of rent from tenants. These financialized landlords use this like whole lexicon of euphemisms to try to whitewash corporate business model that's really based on real estate speculation, evictions, and rent increases. So they speak very fondly of what they call repositioning, like taking old property and stabilizing it. They talk about something called tenant churn. And really what all of these things are, what tenants and housing activists recognize as renovictions, right? This superficial upgrading of aging or intentionally neglected apartment units and buildings for the sole purpose of triggering vacancies so that they can tap into these rent increases. And the last thing I'll say is, since these businesses, this business model relies on displacement, financialized landlords are like welcome economic crises and housing shortages, situations where precarious populations have to turn to rental shelter or get forced out of their homes because of economic hardship. So the excerpt that you'll watch, and really the installation kind of deals with these topics, but in this video, this excerpt from the channel that is about cap rate, you'll hear some of this rhetorical play.
Tesh, please provide your analysis of Canadian apartment property REITs.
Wow. Well, these guys knocked the cover off the ball on Q1. Their funds from operation were up 10% year over year. Same property net operating income was up 7%. Occupancy was up to 98.7. On rent bumps, they were up 9.6. We model them growing at 5% AFFO growth. 72% payout ratio, good balance sheet, 42% debt to fair value. They have intensification opportunities within existing lands that isn't even really priced in that could give them 25% growth over the next.
Part of the excitement about anyone who deals in the apartment space, this narrative, I guess, that millennials have been fed that, okay, you're discouraged. You might never own a home. Maybe you're just going to rent for life. And some investors, I think, have seen that as an opportunity to say, okay, what about the apartment space? If an entire generation are going to be renters, maybe there's some money to be made in apartments.
Well, listen, I mean, the institutions have been feeling that way, and they've been bidding these things up for sure.
Okay, and if you are a millennial, I know it's much tougher for you. I give you full points, much tougher for you in this kind of housing market in the big centers than it would have been for me, a Gen Xer. But when I was your age, I also thought I would never own a home. And tonight I'll go home and I'll collect some garbage cans off the curb. I don't know how it happened, but it happened.
Welcome to Markham Road Apartments at 225 Markham Road. In the heart of a great Scarborough neighborhood, you'll come home to a spacious, well-appointed lobby. Both attractive and secure, the building features controlled access and a security system. Inside each spacious 1, 2, and 3-bedroom suite, you'll find beautiful low-maintenance wood floors, private balconies to take in the views, bright open kitchens with modern appliances, and plenty of living space. The 3-bedroom suites have 2 bathrooms, and you'll enjoy a restful night's sleep in your roomy bedroom with plenty of space for your belongings.
Are you thinking about your own portfolio any differently than you would have been a year ago? In other words, as you work through this pandemic, I mean, we know you may be in a slightly different position to those who are, fully into mall real estate. They're thinking quite differently. But have you changed your thinking about where you want to play and what acquisitions you might want to make or what works for you?
No, like our strategy is intact. Like, we're not changing strategies. Our strategy from the very beginning was built on resilience. And what drew myself and CAPREIT ultimately into apartments was just the stability of the asset class. Everybody needs a place to live.
Do you have previous recessions to kind of mark against to say, what happens to occupancy, what happens to delinquencies? I mean, is there sort of benchmarks you can use to sort of try to understand what could happen to the business as we go forward?
Well, it's my first pandemic. But it's certainly not my first bad economic cycle. And I've been a participant in multifamily in several really bad economic cycles. And what we know in all of these cases is that apartments do well in uncertain economic times. When people are uncertain about investing in the real estate market or have lost the capital to be an investor in the real estate market, they will go to rental. And so this we know from history, and I think maybe we talked last time about what happened south of the border when the housing collapse happened. Mm-hmm. You saw a very strong rental. So I'm very confident that rental is going to do well in uncertain or disrupted economic times.
How has rent collection been going, and have you seen any kind of change in that trend over the last few months?
It's gone remarkably well. The trend, if anything, has improved slightly. It's improved in the last few weeks. As tribunals have opened up slowly, those people that were perhaps holding on to rent, not sure what was going to happen, have made rent payments. There's actually been a mild improvement in our collections.
If mark-to-market rents are not where they were pre-pandemic, we will definitely see an offsetting benefit of increased apartment churn or turnover, okay? And that will reveal itself because there are uncertain economic times, okay? When people lose their jobs, they go home. When people lose their jobs, they double up. When uncertain or bad economic times happen, it naturally creates churn everywhere, changing movements. That will definitely reveal itself in the apartment world, is my view. And the actual yield of apartment buildings could go up, even if mark-to-market rents go down, because you'll be tapping those mark-to-market rents, those lower mark-to-market rents in much larger volumes.
But I think that what we all need to understand is that the flow of rent from the renter to the landlord, if that is disrupted, it has many downstream effects. If we use the river analogy of that flow of money, and if that flow stops, we have mortgage issues, property tax issues, utility issues, our wage issues. So I think that the government needs and does understand that. I think government programs, if the money is going to be directed for housing, I think the government messaging needs to say, put it in the hands of the housing providers, because people may be afraid to part with money during these really uncertain times. And that's just a natural human reaction. But we're all feeling a little bit afraid in this current environment.
Hey guys, it's Adrian here, the Canadian in a t-shirt.
It's Griffin here, and I hope you're all having a fantastic day.
Welcome to my channel.
Drop it.
Today, I'll be breaking down the best Canadian REITs.
Today, folks, we're talking about the best Canadian real estate investment trust for dividend income.
We're going to be doing a full industry comparison of the top real estate investment trust in Canada.
I'm going to show you step by step how to value a stock so we can determine whether it's a buy or a sell.
I figured maybe I should diversify a little more. What companies are actually performing well in this pandemic?
With the pandemic, the real estate market has been hit hard, so now is a great time to buy these REITs at a huge discount. And when they recover, we'll earn great capital gains. Plus, we'll enjoy reliable passive income every month along the way.
Thank you so much, Jess. Perhaps now is a good time to open up for questions, unless Will, you have something to add?
No, I think that's a good place to end. I'm curious to hear if any of those works resonated with the conference attendees, especially as you're preparing for a weekend of engagement with the conference topic, where this work is really kind of dealing with it from a very oblique perspective. So I was reading the questions in the Q&A, but I want to give it some time to answer those comments and questions because they're really insightful. So Jazz, maybe I'll do that after this. Is that the way that we want to do it?
Yeah, wonderful. I'll just unmute myself here. I just wanted to mention for the Q&A as well, if anybody wanted to share their questions out loud or comments out loud, I'm happy to give audience members the ability to unmute themselves. But otherwise, we do have some questions waiting for us in the Q&A. So we could get started with those ones there. Henry, if you wanted to perhaps read them. And
yeah, actually, I really, I appreciate Alice's question. Alice, I don't know if you want to just say it out loud or should I just read them? Give me a sign and I will do that. Oh, okay. Alice is like, no. So I will read it. Hi, Will. I've been reading about quote unquote deadpan as an aesthetic strategy in contemporary art and photography. I'm just basing on the slides, but I feel your images have that kind of style to them in quite an incisive and sometimes sorry, is that Uber? Deadpan, humorous, even smirky, side-swipe kind of way, you know, a public intellectual jab. Is this maybe connected to what you are calling quote-unquote vernacular, and could we go back to the quote-unquote pre-existing conditions image and connect your answer to the so-called COVID-based racism stoked by the quote-unquote China virus, even though we know anti-Asian racism has been around for a long time. Racial capitalism and community well-being and resilience, ability to bounce back to find another day. And finally, the last part of the question, gosh, how heavy are those grenade pieces, like the difficult topic? Thank you so much, Alice. I think that's a very acute observation. So I mean, maybe I'll just give the floor to Wil to, if you're ready.
Yeah, I'm trying to parse this to find the question. I think for me more interesting is Alice, your observation or the use of that term deadpan. Yeah, for sure. I think that's what I was referring to. Like there is a deadpan style, quality to staged stock photography. It looks different, it feels different because they are actors than say sort of journalist photography, which you can actually also, is now all kind of commodified as stock imagery. You can just, it's all owned by these image companies. So yes, I think I was thinking about that that deadpan look as a vernacular associated with that kind of stage photography. Go back to connect your answer. I don't really understand the next part of the question about the pre-existing conditions, but the granite pieces are heavy. That little thing it's not big. It's like 12 inches by 24 inches by 4 inches. Henry, you had to lift that into the gallery, right?
Yeah,
like 160 pounds. I mean, it's meant to last. Granite. Yeah.
Yeah, it was a 3-person job for sure.
Yeah. But thank you, Alice, for that. Those really thoughtful insights. You want to choose a question there, Henry?
So we have a question asking about because for like your work deals with precarious work, labor, and economic conditions. And do you maybe as part of your work and do you incorporate direct action into your work, or do you think that's perhaps something can be done separately? So maybe I will interpret this question as more of like, this more direct action and the subjects addressed in your work.
Yeah. I mean, I have the utmost respect for activists and people who do direct action, work in communities, do activism. I'm a very shy, private person. I wish I could do that. But yeah, I think for me, making art is a way to try to understand these things and to help to shape the discourse around some of these things. I'm a teacher, so I try in that venue, in those forums, to try to make art a platform for political awareness, if not direct action. And I think that's the way I would answer that question. Momo, interesting video. Are they sequenced in terms of global time frame from one city to another? I'm not sure I understand. So is this referring to the racket video?
Yes, I believe so.
So it's so the videos are they're clips from one location. if I understand the question correctly, they're all in the stock exchange building in New York. They are temporally sequenced. So they were clips that I chose that had something to do with the pandemic or kind of subjects that were important in that moment just before the pandemic hit. And then it straddles the pandemic. So you see at the beginning, everybody's crowded onto that balcony with no face coverings, and then at some point that spectacle is done with people on Zoom, which I really liked because it was this recursive thing. There was the grid, and then the grid on the that's projected onto the backdrop in the balcony. So I like that recursiveness. And then towards the end, you see a bit more kind of action. I think it's one of the last clips. You see a bunch of people in face masks back at it, let's say. So business as usual.
I think I'm sort of aware of our time. I just have one small question from one question I think I spotted in the chats from Paul. I think Paul is addressing the displacement Chinese characters piece. The question is, any inclination to photograph the developed site?
Oh, going back to Shanghai and
yeah, the earthwork.
I hadn't thought about it. I mean, probably what's built there is some horrible kind of faceless building, right? I probably wouldn't just photograph it. I'd probably try to figure out what's actually there, who owns it, why it was built, and maybe do something like that. I mean, that piece is the photograph, and there's a video that documents the construction of the earthwork, and it's actually shot by shot, kind of cut to mimic the spiral jetty film that Robert Smithson made. So maybe it could follow, like a companion work, maybe go down that direction, make something completely different.
Well, thank you so much, Will, for this talk and the conversation. I really enjoyed this closer look at your work, and I'm going to put a link to the exhibition in the chat so that people can get to know more about it. And as I mentioned earlier, the exhibition is on view until the end of May. So, and who knows whether we'll go into a lockdown or not, but BC is doing not so well. So maybe when you have time, feel free to drop by at Center A at Unit 205, 268 Kiefer Street, Vancouver, and to see the exhibition. Yeah, I think there's a lot to think about, because what I find really attractive about and really thoughtful about Will's work in practice is that the images, the footage always stay in my mind. Just for example, last night I feel like I'm oversharing, but last night I was in the shower, I was thinking about the bell ringing, and I feel like I could just hear it out of nowhere, like all the time. So that was definitely something. Yeah, so I would like to wrap it up, and I will stay on until the end of day one of the conference. And please, if you have any other questions, feel free to bring them. And thank you so much, everybody. Yeah, oh, one last thing, I'm just gonna do like a plug, basically. Please subscribe to our newsletters, and I will include a link in the chat and stay tuned. Thank you. Thank you so much, Wil. And I'm sorry that I interrupted you.
No, I just wanted to say thank you, all the attendees, and you.
Wonderful. So I'll just jump on here again to echo a huge thank you to both Henry and Wil. That was amazing. So thank you so much for taking the time to share that presentation with us. So what we'll do now is we'll take a short 10-minute break before jumping to our next live virtual conference event. So in about 10 minutes, we will be hearing from the Asian Canadian Writers Workshop for a panel moderated by Ada Khan, titled Vancouver's Chinatown Then and Now. So please feel free to just stay on the Zoom call, or you can leave the call anytime and jump back on using the exact same link, and we'll be here. So thank you so much again, everyone who joined us, and we hope that you join us for our next event.